On today's episode, could we see a Frank Nazar NHL call-up soon?
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Please do me a quick favor. Go and hit that like button. Jump in the comment section down below as well to let me know your thoughts on a potential Frank Nazar NHL call-up and your prediction for tonight's matchup against the Boston Bruins. Go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube as well. Really closing in on my goal of 2,000 subscribers, and hitting that button won't cost you anything. It's 100% free. And last but certainly not least, do gotta let you know today's sponsor is FanDuel. If you're not already a member, be sure to check out FanDuel.com right now to have a chance to win $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins with America's #1 sportsbook. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Yet another Original Six matchup here this evening as the Blackhawks return home to the United Center in hopes of snapping their 3-game losing skid as they'll be taking on the Boston Bruins with a rare 6:30 Central Time PM puck drop, not the regular scheduled 7:30 p.m. puck drop at the UC. And the game, FYI, is scheduled to be televised on TNT, True TV, and HBO Max. However, in the Chicagoland area, TNT is expected to be blacked out tonight. So if you're not a CHSN subscriber, if you don't have the app, you're probably going to have to watch tonight's game through True TV or HBO Max because the NHL. But getting to know the Bruins a little bit, taking a deep dive into them. Obviously, it has been a very noteworthy start to the season. Jim Montgomery officially canned a couple of weeks ago. The Bruins currently sit 13-11-3 through their opening 27 games, but have responded nicely since Joe Sacco took over. The Bruins are 5-2-0 under Sacco's leadership, including a 3-2 overtime win against the Detroit Red Wings last night. So the Bruins should have a little bit of tired legs here as they'll be traveling to Chicago for the back end of their back-to-back. And I do think it's worth pointing out, I went and looked at the box score from last night's game between Boston and Detroit, another Original Six matchup, FYI. And Joonas Korpisalo was the one who got the nod for Boston last night, meaning Jeremy Swayman is likely to get the go in between the pipes for them this evening. And Swayman, there was all that contract discussion and him holding out leading up to the start of the regular season. Hasn't gotten off to the best start. He has a 7-9-2 record in 18 appearances, along with a 309 goals against average and 892 save percentage. Korpisalo has much better numbers than Swayman thus far this season, so could be a little bit of a break for the Blackhawks as Swayman hasn't really found any consistency so far since signing that long-term deal. And taking a look at the team numbers here for the Boston Bruins, on the man advantage, interestingly enough, despite having one of the biggest weapons in all of the NHL and David Pastrnak, they're 31st out of 32 teams on the man advantage, converting at just a 12% clip. They're also 19th on the penalty kill in the bottom half of the league at 79%. They are one of the better face-off clubs in the NHL, though, 10th in that category, winning 52% of their draws. So the Blackhawks going to have to dig deep tonight and hopefully not get crushed at the face-off dot. In terms of goals for per game played, the Bruins, surprisingly 30th out of 32 teams, 2.48 goals per game. Defensively, a little bit better, 17th in the NHL, allowing 3.04 goals per game. Taking that, looking at the Blackhawks now and comparing their team numbers with the Bruins, Hawks are 10th now on the man advantage in the NHL, converting at a 24% clip. Would be really big if they can generate a handful of power plays here this evening. They've done a better job of that these last couple of games, but had a 5-game stretch prior, not all that long ago, in which they only had one single power play opportunity in each of those 5 games. So they do a good job once they get on the man advantage. It's just about getting to that part. And the Blackhawks also have been phenomenal on the penalty kill for the last month now or so. They're all the way up to 14th in the NHL at 80% while shorthanded. So in the top 15 on both special teams units. Really significant stuff out of the Blackhawks there. They do struggle at the dot, though, 30th out of 32 teams, winning just 44% of their faceoffs, so a huge discrepancy tonight against the Bees. Hawks are slightly worse than the Bruins offensively, 31st out of 32 teams, averaging just 2.44 goals per game, but they are 19th in goals allowed per game, averaging just 3.12 goals. Taking a look at some individual player statistics for the Bruins, no surprise, David Pastrnak, leading scorer with 24 points. Brad Marchand, second in points with 18. They're the two leading scorers for Boston thus far. A team that, as I just talked about, diving through the numbers, has been surprisingly offensively challenged here this season. Elias Lindholm and Pavel Zacha are the only two other players on this roster with 12-plus points. So hasn't been a typical Bruins start to the season, but they have found their footing here as of late, winning 5 of their last 7 games. As far as the Bruins lineup that we can expect, don't have anything from the morning skate as this is the back end of their back-to-back. They didn't have a morning skate this morning, but these were the line combinations and defensive pairings they rolled with last night against the Red Wings. Brad Marchand, Elias Lindholm, and Justin Brazeau on the top line. Morgan Geekie, Pavel Zacha, and David Pastrnak as the second line. Travis Frederick, Charlie Coyle, and Mark Kastelik as the third line, and then Cole Koepke, John Beecher, and Mark McLaughlin rounding things out on the fourth line, Wouldn't be surprised, though, Blackhawks fans, to see former Blackhawk Tyler Johnson get into the Bruins lineup here this evening as he makes his return to the United Center. He's only appeared in 8 of the opening 27 games for the Bees so far this season with 2 assists, but does feel like this would be a good opportunity to get him back in the lineup. Looking at the defensive pairings for the Bruins, Jordan Oesterle, Blackhawks legend, slated to be on the top pairing with Charlie McAvoy. Nikita Zadorov, another Blackhawks legend, on the second pairing with Brandon Carlo. And then Mason Lowry and Andrew Peeke round things out, or at least they did last night, on the third defensive pairing. And it is also worth noting that Hampus Lindholm is out for the Bruins right now. Huge loss for them on the back end. Moving over to the Blackhawks in their projected lineup for this game tonight as they return to the United Center. Based on what we saw at the morning skate, which just wrapped up about 15 minutes ago, Blackhawks are going to roll with the same exact lineup as they did on Monday night in Toronto, which, even though they lost 4-1, as I talked about in my recap, it was one of the best performances by the Blackhawks all year long at even strength. So no reason whatsoever to change these forward lines or deep pairings up. I absolutely love that Taylor Hall and Tyler Bertuzzi are expected to remain with Connor Bedard on the top line. I thought Bertuzzi did some good things in his first look of the year with Bedard. Can't believe it took 25 games to get them on the top line with one another. But with both Hall and Bertuzzi being former Bruins, although Bertuzzi, I think, only appeared in 20 games for them, could have some extra motivation here this evening. Love to give them another look with Connor Bedard. Ryan Donato, Philip Kurashev, Teuvo Teravainen expected to remain as the second line, the quietest of the 4 forward lines for the Blackhawks on Monday. Would love to see Kurashev and Teravainen make a more consistent impact for this offense. That's one thing that's really been killing them so far this year. Ilya Mikheyev, Jason Dickinson, and Nick Foligno, the shutdown trio for Luke Richardson, also had a marvelous night offensively in Toronto. They're sticking together once again. And then Pat Maroon, Craig Smith, and Lucas Reichel serving as the fourth line, the best line for the Blackhawks in Toronto, the trio that mustered up the lone goal. Got to get Lucas Reichel more ice time considering the skating numbers that I dissected on yesterday's episode. Just a reminder, go and check out yesterday's show if you haven't already, Blackhawks fans. JFresh Hockey on X, an incredible hockey analytics and data source that I've shouted out numerous times here on the podcast, posted some really cool skating statistics on social media a couple of days ago, and I dove through all of them, the slowest and fastest forwards and defensemen, according to the numbers from JFresh Hockey. Lucas Reichel is the only special skater with offensive attributes on this Blackhawks team. The only other forward that popped up in the top skating metrics was Ilya Mikheyev, and we know he doesn't have the offensive abilities along with the skating. Lucas Reichel does, and that's why it's so frustrating to me that this guy plays 11, 12 minutes a night because he's one of the few players who has speed through the neutral zone, can enter the offensive zone, and can create. Yet we limit him to fourth line minutes with Pat Maroon and Craig Smith. This line has been absolutely humming. I know you want to get Kurashev and Teravainen going, but they just haven't been producing like this fourth line has. And to win games, I think you got to put the fourth line out there on the ice a little bit more consistently because they've been dynamite with one another. On the back end for the Blackhawks, Alex Vlasic, Connor Murphy, no surprise there. Nolan Allen with Alec Martinez for the second consecutive game as he's in the lineup once again. And then Wyatt Kaiser, who's been playing some marvelous hockey here this year, particularly with Seth Jones out, expected to round things out with TJ Brody, and then Peter Mrazek getting the start in between the pipes after having the night off on Monday in Toronto. Been a couple shaky last few outings for Peter Mrazek. Didn't have his best stuff on Black Friday in Minnesota. Didn't have his best stuff on Sunday at the UC. Hopefully a couple of days rest gets him right. Blackhawks are probably going to need him to be big tonight with a Bruins team that, as I've mentioned, has been playing much better hockey since Joe Sacco stepped in for Jim Montgomery and gave this bunch, I think, a little bit of a wake-up call. All right, there is everything to know before the puck drops again at 6:30 p.m. Central Time tonight at the United Center, not the regularly scheduled 7:30 p.m. puck drop. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I'll talk about whether we could see Frank Nazar getting an NHL call-up in the near future. But first, I do got to talk to you all real quick about the fine folks over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action in the second half of the regular season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and win $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So that when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you also happen to place your bets. And are you feeling good about Connor Bedard returning to the UC, taking on the Boston Bruins here this evening? Do you think he can score more than 0.5 goals? Remember, this is the team that Connor Bedard scored his first NHL goal against. Or how about Connor Bedard to get more than 1.5 points tonight? You and your crew can now win real money this year. Oh my God, I absolutely butchered that. I apologize. FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com today. You'll get started with $150 worth of bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Again, that's FanDuel.com so that you never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the National Football League. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. Now for your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast so that you can become a fantasy hockey expert and get daily tips over your league mates with Steal and Flip. And you can easily find the link to Locked On Fantasy Hockey down in the description or search on YouTube and wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Segment 2, there has been a lot of chatter over the past couple of weeks surrounding Chicago Blackhawks 2022 first-round pick Frank the Tank Nazar and whether he could be on the verge of his first NHL call-up with the Blackhawks, even though things have been better here lately. Still 31st out of 32 teams in the NHL in goals per game. It has been a huge offensive struggle. They really have a lack of center depth down the middle at this point in time, and Frank Nazar has been unbelievable for the Rockford IceHogs. He's now up to 21 points, 10 goals, and 11 assists, the team's leading scorer in 17 AHL games. That's tied for 8th in the AHL in points. And I have mentioned probably since the beginning of November that given these Blackhawks' immense offensive struggles, I wouldn't be completely surprised to see Frank Nazar get a call-up right around this time, early December, right before Christmas. But based on what we've been hearing around the Chicago Blackhawks, rumblings from their front office, that doesn't sound like it's part of the plan at this point in time. And quite honestly, Blackhawks fans, I don't mind it whatsoever. Now, would I have been surprised or will I be surprised to see Frank Nazar get a call-up? Ultimately, I won't, even though the latest rumblings make it seem like the Blackhawks are going to continue with a very patient approach. I don't think it would have been the craziest thing in the world given all of their struggles offensively, and more so than that, just the challenge of who to play at the center ice position, right? Like Connor Bedard has really struggled at the center spot. His faceoff numbers somehow are even worse than last year. Philip Kurashev's had to play the center ice position. He's probably not a center. Ryan Donato's had to play the center ice position. He's probably not a center. Nick Foligno's had to play the center ice position. He's probably not a center. Lucas Reichel's had to play the center ice position. He's probably not a center. Like, the only true center this Blackhawks team has is Jason Dickinson. So for many different reasons, a Frank Nazar call-up would have made sense. However, I really enjoy to hear that Kyle Davidson is going to keep this very patient approach with the prospects and wants to over-marinate them, because quite honestly, it has been the opposite for this Blackhawks prospect pool for far too long, and we've seen it burn them. I mean, Adam Boquist, a player who was rushed to the NHL, never really got significant time in the AHL. Kirby Dach, same exact thing. I think the only reason he played in the AHL was because of a injury clause. Like, he technically wasn't allowed to play because he was from the OHL, but didn't get much development time whatsoever down in Rockford. Kevin Korchinski was kind of rushed to the NHL level last year. We've seen Lucas Reichel maybe get some call-ups when he wasn't 100% ready. And all of those guys that I just mentioned could have used more time developing down at the AHL level. And had that have happened, had the Blackhawks been a little bit more patient with them, who knows how their development paths would have lined up working here in Chicago. So my thoughts on the Frank Nazar situation: I think the NHL could be beneficial to him. And I think he is one of those kids who could be mentally tough enough to handle the losing here with the Blackhawks and maybe not producing as consistently as he was at the or at the AHL level. Now, he also could be producing like he was at the AHL level. We don't really know until we give it a try, and that's why I do think there is some upside to giving Frank Nazar an opportunity. However, you just want to be 100% sure, I think, in this instance, that once Frank comes up, he's going to succeed, because we've seen what's gone wrong when you weren't really sure about that fact with players in the past. And Frank has been on a phenomenal run for the Ice Hogs. He's playing significant minutes, both sides of the ice, offensively, defensively, and he's still showing some growing pains in the process. It's not like he's playing perfect hockey there for Rockford. And listen, he's only 17 games into his AHL career. Like, there's absolutely no rush here. And I think that's a good mentality just for this Blackhawks front office to have with all of their prospects. Now, I do imagine that we're going to see Frank Nazar at some point here in the season, but I think they just want to leave him alone, let him continue to get pro experience and be in a consistent spot, not be jumbling around up and down from the NHL to the AHL. I think they just want to leave him in the same spot right now, let him be comfortable. And quite honestly, I think that's the smartest thing, the smartest way to go about it. But with that being said, we are going to see Frank Nazar at the NHL level this year. I think that's a given, especially if he keeps up this level of success. I just envision that it's probably going to come sometime around February or March when the NHL trade deadline has gone down. The Blackhawks have probably pumped a couple of bodies out, and they're going to be needing some guys to come up to the NHL and fill up some roster spots. I think that's a more likely time for Frank Nazar to get called up. We'll see what winds up happening, but from all the insider rumors around the situation, sounds like Kyle Davidson isn't in any hurry to get the 2022 first-round pick, his first NHL call-up. But with that being said, I do think there is a chance that we see someone called up from the Rockford Ice Hogs in the near future, and someone who I think could be in that mix, someone who I think is ahead of Frank Nazar in the pecking order because he is a little bit more developed at this point in time, is Colton Dach. I think he's a real good candidate for his first NHL call-up. He's now up to 15 points, 7 goals, and 8 assists in 18 games this season. Has been on a real nice stretch. Been playing with Frank Nazar as of late here too, which is probably why, I don't envision a call-up for Colton Dach coming probably until the end of December or early January at the absolute earliest, because I think for the same reasons as Frank Nazar, like they want to leave him in a consistent spot. He and Colton Dach are finding success with one another. I think you want to leave those two together and let them establish some good chemistry, and I think it's the best thing for both of their developments. However, I think if Colton continues on this run, he is going to get that first NHL call-up. I think he's someone the Blackhawks would like to see at the NHL level and has done a really good job of taking on that power forward type of mold that the Blackhawks have been missing in their forward group for far too long. Someone with good speed, not an elite skater, but he's a better skater than I think people give him credit for, especially for someone his size. I mean, 6'4", 215 pounds. He's an absolute bowling ball out there. He'll crash the net, and I think he's got a pretty good shot as well. And with this recent stretch, Colton Dach now has 42 points in 66 AHL games over the last 2 years. It sounded like he was potentially on the verge of a call-up last year before he unfortunately got injured. If he's able to stay healthy and keep up this production, I think Colton Dach, truthfully, is the one coming up from Rockford, is the first Rockford IceHogs forward to get an NHL call-up this year. Don't expect it coming relatively soon, though, Blackhawks fans. Cole Guttman, Landon Slaggert, I think, are two other guys who could potentially earn a call-up. Slaggert, probably an outside chance, though. I think he's behind both Dach and Nazar in the pecking order. Cole Guttman, though, is always an intriguing option. A consistent producer whenever he's at the AHL level. 13 points in 18 games so far this year, 6 goals and 7 assists. The reason I bring up Guttman is because he has played the center ice position under Luke Richardson before, and that, as I just referenced, is a hole for the Chicago Blackhawks team right now. So I do wonder if Cole Guttman, someone who's been with this team for the last couple of years, really doesn't have all that much left to prove at the AHL level. I don't know if he's ever going to be an NHL player, but I do think because of his age and how further along the development path he is, he's older than all of these prospects. He's in that Colton Dach conversation and being the first forward called up to the Blackhawks. There are my thoughts on a potential Frank Nazar call-up and some other forward prospects that we could possibly see called up to the NHL scene. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, before I put a stamp on today's episode, still got to get into my best bets tonight against the Boston Bruins. Real quick, though, I do got to talk to you all about PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. And PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way for you to now play daily fantasy sports, because all you got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Do you think Connor Bedard is going to score more than 0.5 goals tonight against the Boston Bruins? Or how about more than 1.5 points? You and your crew can now cook up hot takes and win real money this hockey season when you run your game with PrizePicks. And one thing I really do enjoy about PrizePicks is it's the only real daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so that your lineups stay in play even if one of your players were to get injured. Be sure to go and download the PrizePicks app today, and you'll get $50 instantly when you use the code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps and put down a $5 lineup. Again, download the PrizePicks app, use the code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get a free $50 when you put $5 down. PrizePicks, run your game. Before I get into segment 3 and close out today's episode, just want to let you all know to be on the lookout for my recap of the Blackhawks matchup with the Boston Bruins. That episode will be dropping on Thursday morning. Be on the lookout for that. And also, in the episode tomorrow, I'll be going through the 4 nations rosters that are expected to be released, might honestly have already been released during the middle of this recording. So make sure to be on the lookout for a good episode of Locked On Blackhawks tomorrow. Getting into the best bets courtesy of the fine folks over at FanDuel for tonight's original 6 matchup between the Blackhawks and the Bruins. Boston -160 favorites at this point in time. Blackhawks +132, good number if you think they can snap their 3-game losing skid. The Bruins -1.5 is +160. Hawks +1.5 is -200. Over 5.5, -106. The slight underdog at this point with under 5.5 sitting at -114. The favorites in the goal scoring department, David Pastrnak, unsurprisingly, #1 at +120. Connor Bedard at plus 240, Marchand at plus 260, Donato plus 310, Coyle plus 320, Zacha plus 320, Taylor Hall plus 330, Elias Lindholm plus 330, Teuvo Teravainen plus 350, and Tyler Bertuzzi plus 370. Listen, I know it has been a tough stretch here recently for the Blackhawks since that big Wednesday 6-2 victory over the Dallas Stars in which Taylor Hall scored a hat trick. However, I really think the Blackhawks have played good hockey and played some pretty consistent hockey in 4 or 5 games in a row here tonight. And I think this is a good opportunity for them to win this game. I'm not going to take them money line, interestingly enough. I wouldn't hate anyone for taking Hawks money line here tonight, though I think that's a good number. Where I'm going to go with things, and honestly what's worked well for me so far this year, is playing players against their former teams. That has just worked marvelously so far for me this year. Ryan Donato in particular, he absolutely crushes teams he's played for in the past. Can't bet on Ryan Donato plus 310 goal score tonight, though, because the Blackhawks are at home. Ryan Donato, 9 of his 10 goals have come on the road this year. Guy doesn't score at the UC. Where I'm going with this, though, tonight, Blackhawks fans, I'm riding with Tyler Bertuzzi for a second consecutive game. Unfortunately, didn't get that same plus 500 number that I got on Monday. That obviously was thrown out there before the sportsbooks knew he was going to be playing on the top line with Connor Bedard. That has dropped down to plus 370 here tonight. However, I'm going to take that once again and parlay it with Tyler Bertuzzi to have 2 or more shots on goal. 2 or more shots along with a Bertuzzi anytime goal score comes out to plus 433. And then the next bet I'm going to take 2 plays here tonight, Blackhawks fans. Connor Bedard to have 1 or more points, parlayed with Taylor Hall to have 3 or more shots on goal. The former Boston Bruin usually plays good at the United Center. I think he's going to have that extra aggressive mentality tonight against his former squad. Bedard 1+ point with Hall, 3+ shots on goal parlayed comes out to plus 332. Either one of those hits, I'm putting $5 down on both, as I always do. It's going to be a good night for you, boy. Hope anyone out there who tails has some good luck with me here this evening. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way, you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Follow me on X at Jack Bushman 2, but make sure to follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way, you can get all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, which is going to be a fun one, 4 Nations recap as well as 4 Nations roster breakdown, as well as a recap of tonight's game with the Bruins. Until then, everyone have a great rest of your Wednesdays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.